Let me say this very clearly at the start, because people love to twist intent. This conversation began as a history lesson, not a party endorsement, not a voting instruction, not a loyalty test. A history lesson about why Black people left the Republican Party. And if we don't slow down and actually explain that properly, then every argument that comes after it is built on half-truths, talking points, and emotional shortcuts. So I want to walk this all the way through, patiently, honestly, and without pretending this is simple. Because it's not. After my first video, a lot of people reacted. That's expected. Politics touches identity, history, and trauma. People are going to feel something. But one exchange stood out. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was thoughtful and substantive. Cedric Glover responded. And I want to be very clear about who Cedric is, because context matters. Cedric Glover is one of the smartest people I know. He is a former mayor of Shreveport. He is a former state representative in Louisiana. He has been inside the system, not just studying it from the outside. He understands how power actually moves, where compromises are made, where leverage exists, and where it disappears. Cedric's point was straightforward. He said, I was on solid ground historically until I skipped over Richard Nixon in the Southern strategy. And once I did that, the explanation started to lose structural integrity. That critique was fair, not because the history I gave was wrong, but because it was incomplete. So this video is not me walking anything back. It's me finishing the lesson. Because if you explain why Black people left the Republican Party without fully unpacking the Southern strategy, you explain the outcome but not the mechanism. And the mechanism is everything. So let's slow this down. Let's start with something uncomfortable but necessary. At the presidential level in the United States, politics is effectively binary, Republican or Democrat, red or blue. That's not because other ideas don't exist. It's because the system is designed to funnel power into two dominant coalitions. The Electoral College reinforces it. Winner-take-all rules reinforce it. Campaign finance structures reinforce it. Ballot access laws reinforce it. Third parties don't fail because their ideas are bad. They fail because the system filters them out before they ever reach scale. So yes, at the national presidential level, the system is binary. But here's where people go wrong. They take binary to mean choice without leverage. They assume that because there are only two dominant options, the only responses are obedience or disengagement. And that assumption is deadly, because disengagement does not punish power. Disengagement rewards the most organized side. You don't lose power because you're wrong. You lose power because you're absent. Now let's rewind to the original question that started all of this. Why did Black people leave the Republican Party? The short answer people give is civil rights. The real answer is backlash to civil rights. After the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the federal government did something it had rarely done in American history. It forced the South to change, not encouraged, not suggested, forced. Segregation was no longer legal. Voter suppression was no longer legal. Federal enforcement became real. That didn't magically change hearts. It disrupted a political order that had existed for generations. For decades, white Southern political power had been anchored in the Democratic Party. When national Democrats embraced civil rights enforcement, those voters became politically homeless. And that's where Richard Nixon enters the story. Nixon did not invent racism. He did not invent white resentment. He did not invent backlash politics. What Nixon did was organize it, professionalize it, and make it electorally profitable. The Southern strategy was not about openly opposing Black equality. That language was no longer acceptable on a national stage. So the language changed. Race became states' rights. Segregation became local control. White grievance became law and order. Economic resentment became welfare. Cultural anxiety became traditional values. Now, this is where nuance matters, so listen carefully. Every one of those topics can be discussed legitimately. States' rights can be debated. Crime policy can be debated. Welfare policy can be debated. Cultural values can be debated. But the Southern strategy was not about honest debate. It was about signaling. It allowed politicians to reassure white Southern voters that the old social order would be protected, without ever saying that explicitly. That's why it worked. It allowed people to tell themselves they weren't voting out of racism while still voting for outcomes that preserved racial hierarchy. That psychological cover is what made the strategy durable. Once Nixon proved this could win elections, it didn't disappear. It spread. It evolved. It became embedded in party messaging. It became normalized. And when the Republican Party absorbed the South, the party itself changed. This is where people get stuck arguing slogans instead of structures. Political parties are not moral institutions. They are coalitions. They evolve based on who they bring in, who they prioritize, and who they protect. So when people say Republicans freed the slaves so they can't be racist, they are freezing history in 1865. We are talking about what happened after 1968. Parties are not static. They move where power moves. Now here's the next layer most people never talk about. Once politics polarizes this deeply, pressure starts to disappear. People begin to think in absolutes. If you criticize the party, you're helping the other side. If you don't show loyalty, you're betraying the cause. If you demand accountability, you're being unrealistic. That's how movements lose leverage. And this is where I want to be very precise because words matter. A lot of people say progressives disengaged. I don't fully accept that framing. Some people disengaged, sure, that happens in every movement. But I have also watched party structures demobilize voters, sideline grassroots energy, and choke out insurgent candidates, especially at the state and local level. Funding dries up. Endorsements vanish. Ballot access becomes harder. Support turns conditional. Momentum gets quietly suffocated. That is not conspiracy. That is politics. Power protects itself. And this is where I need to clarify something I said that keeps getting misunderstood. When I say black people shouldn't be Republicans or Democrats, I am not saying people shouldn't vote. I'm not saying disengage. I am not saying both sides are the same. I'm talking primarily about local and state politics where blind party loyalty does the most damage. Local government controls police policy, school boards, zoning and development, public contracts, prosecutors, judges, state legislators who draw district maps. These decisions shape your daily life far more than whoever is in the White House. And yet, this is where people are most likely to vote out of habit instead of leverage. A local official can wear a D or an R and still do nothing for your community if they know your vote is guaranteed. That's the trap. What matters is not the label. What matters is leverage. Do you show up in primaries? Do you organize locally? Do you track voting records? Do you punish broken promises at the city council level? Do you hold district attorneys and judges accountable? Because when politicians know you can swing a race, they respect you. When they think you're locked in, they ignore you. So the solution is not to abandon the system, and it's not to worship it either. The solution is to understand it well enough to use it without being owned by it. At the national level, sometimes you are choosing the least harmful option. That's reality. At the local and state level, you have far more room to build independent power, issue-based coalitions, and pressure campaigns that force both parties to negotiate. History backs this up. Black political power has never come from blind loyalty. It has come from organization, from discipline, from being too costly to ignore. That's how Reconstruction happened. That's how civil rights happened. That's how voting rights happened. Pressure, not devotion. So let me land this slowly and clearly. Yes, the system is binary at the presidential level, but power is not binary. Progress has never come from choosing between two finished options. It has always come from forcing one of those options to change. The real question is not whether the system is binary. The real question is whether we understand how to apply pressure, locally, consistently, and strategically, so that either side has to move, because that is where power actually lives.